Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack 4 Business Podcast.
Today's show is brought to you by our K4B Profit Snapshot. Here's one question worth sitting with. If you stepped away from your business for 30 days, would it grow or contract? That answer tells you a lot about where you really stand. Try the free 5-minute snapshot. It measures process, profit, and personal freedom. Link is in the show notes.
Question to our audience. You're doing everything right, so why does your success feel empty and misaligned? That's the question our guest speaks to directly in this episode. He'll unpack why so many founders, leaders, and professionals feel stuck, burned out, or disconnected, even when their business looks successful from the outside. We're going to explore the difference between knowledge and wisdom in business, why avoiding inner work quietly limits growth, how fear shows up as overwork, control, or constant motion, what it really means to lead with clarity instead of ego, and how to reconnect with purpose without walking away from success. Our guest today is Dr. Ron Stotts. He's been transforming lives for over 40 years as a philosopher, educator, and transformational coach. His work bridges deep wisdom with real-world application, helping people and organizations unlock clarity, purpose, and sustainable growth. Dr. Stotts, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Do you have a favorite quote or saying you'd like to share?
Well, I think the title of the program is pretty much the favorite quote. I remember, walking in Big Sur, California with Joseph Campbell, and he shared that quote with me, and it really struck home in terms of my working with clients and helping them work through their emotional backlog at the time and working with couples and business people back then. And yeah, so that's probably my favorite quote is, you've got to enter that cave that you fear to enter to find the treasure that you seek.
So, Ron, tell me, you have titles, you have credentials, but who are you beyond that? Like, if someone is going to walk up and say, "I'm going to need help," and how do I know Ron has the gravitas to get me past my problems?
Well, just probably because of my lifestyle. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I was suicidal, chemical imbalance, PTSD, and I was a mess, quite literally. And it was really from that very broken place, I figured out what I needed to do to recreate myself, discover who I truly was, and start living the life that I really was meant to live. And so I walk the walk. The journey that I help others on is a journey that I'm intimately familiar with and have taken thousands of times, not only on my own, but with others.
I find it fascinating that you also have the word philosophy as part of the background, and I think it's fascinating. I think it's cool. What brought you into the philosophical neck of the woods as part and parcel of the overall process of becoming you and what you do?
Well, my first stab at getting better was, traditional education. I went into getting degrees and pieces of paper that I thought the information I'd get would help me. And through that process, I certainly learned a lot and benefited greatly from that experience, but I really didn't find answers. I still was having a lot of troubles, and that's when I started digging deeper. It's like, well, what's underneath this formal education, and what's more in terms of ancient wisdom, in terms of, you know, even physics, and looking in all those different directions. And that became a journey that I'm still on today. Still looking deeper, always trying to figure out more. And I enjoy it. It's an adventure for me that allows me to continue to grow and continue to support others in their growth.
Is there a certain philosophy that you tend to gravitate to, or a certain series of philosophical points of view that you work with that resonate strongly with you and your programs?
There certainly has been throughout the years. I have been doing this for about 45 years. So, yeah, at various times, various ideas and concepts come into mind. But to be honest with you, they start evolving out of your own experience, out of my recognizing that, that the universe is perfect, so that everything that's happening to me and coming into my life is really designed to support my growth. I'm not being attacked. I'm not, I'm not having challenges. I'm having opportunities. And, I've gotten to a point now where I guess my whole philosophy in life is all I really need to do is breathe and be curious. And as I breathe and be curious, that allows me to be present. And in that present state, I'm able to access the highest levels of thinking and awareness that I am capable of accessing. So it allows me to really handle everything and anything that comes up in my life. Whether I'm working with a client or remodeling a bathroom or playing golf.
Golf. Oh, there we go. There we go. Are you a good golfer?
Am I a good golfer? Has
Well,
anybody
I'll reframe it. Do you enjoy playing golf?
I love playing golf.
Perfect.
And
Perfect.
people say that I'm fairly good, yeah.
I wasn't gonna judge. I just, sometimes people play golf and it's like, yep, yep, it's a it's a goal. You get
Yeah,
that
I
handicap
love it,
down. Awesome.
yeah. Every time you hit it, it's a new opportunity to do well.
Yeah, usually it's my opportunity to get the bird in the tree, and as it goes shanks the wrong direction. But that's just me though, and I have to practice more often than once a year. What was your cave? What was your cave moment that you came across that you know that brought this together? That's essentially going. Someone has that quote over here, and now I've just come through, and I go, oh, I found my bear in my cave type thing. What was your moment that made that crystallize?
Good question. I've had many, to be honest with you. Initially though, I was probably, I was very much into meditation when I was young. I mean, I probably by the time I was 40, I'd meditated 30,000 hours or so. One of my students figured out at some point. But I was in my, I think, early 40s, and I had never really involved in drugs or anything like that. And I decided to take mushrooms just to see what in the world all that was about. And I was laying on the beach in Santa Barbara, California, in a lovely spot that I used to go to. And as I was laying there, I very graphically found myself in a direct experience of discovering a cave. And as I looked into that cave, I saw all these amazing, frightening looking masks. And as I was looking in that and looking at all these masks, I found myself really, instead of being frightened, I went, wow, these are amazing, these are incredible pieces of art. And the next thought that came to me is like, this is my inner cave. Those were masks that I created as a child to protect myself. And I did the strangest thing, but I just called into the cave and I said, "Great job talking to my inner child." It was pretty
Wow.
abstract at that point, but I was very, very grounded in that experience. And he finally came out, and I'm a little frustrated that I hadn't been frightened away like everybody else, but it really allowed me to see the reality of that. And I mean, I had a direct experience of it, and so the inner cave is something, at this point in my life, I've put up party lights and have music and invite friends in, and if they see something that needs to be cleaned up, they let me know. But, it's various times. I mean, I think I was in my 60s when I was going through an experience and I saw, I started really having like something was being released on a level that I was not used to. And it was watching all the folks, guys that were killed in Vietnam that I was, and all my friends. I'd lost several dozen friends over there, and it was an interesting, terrifying, and exciting moment that continued on and on for quite a while. But it allowed me to heal. It took that much healing, that much preparation before I was really able to see my deepest scar, and that deepest scar was, of course, losing all those friends. And it just became that just was another healing opportunity for me. And that's really what I'm grateful for is now whenever anything comes up, it's great because it's another level of healing. It's another level of expansion. Just recently I was getting a little frustrated with my work because I wasn't all of a sudden with the client decline. And I realized, "Oh, it's time for me to shift what I do." And I began exploring a whole nother level that I'm ready to work on now. So in other words, wasn't the universe saying, you're too old, you're too whatever, and you're not doing the work anymore. It says it's time for you to evolve. And that's really the journey into the inner cave is, that you hear people saying, well, I don't feel like I'm enough or I'm not fulfilling my potential or whatever they come up with. Well, you're not enough. That's the truth of it. But the interesting and amazing and wonderful part is that only is an indicator that it's time to go within and access more of who and what you are so that you can be more than enough. And once you discover that, then your life shifts to one where you're evolving all the time. Because anytime something comes up, it's time to heal something. You heal that. That gives you access to another part of yourself. And in that growth process, you become more whole, more authentic, more capable, and life continues.
So the cave is a metaphor or allegory. And do people realize that As a kid, they experience certain things that put them back on their feet, on their heel, and it's stuck with them. They haven't let go. So, do you help get people and find that cave, and one way or the other, and sort through it? Is that like a long process? Is that something that at stage one, and then stage two is now? You work through the what's behind door number one. Let's go to door number two, and now start exploring what you can do. Is that kind of the process?
I would say that's a way to look at it. Yeah, it only takes a couple of months. It really does to really discover and really move into that cave. And that cave, of course, is filled with all the unacknowledged emotions and fears and things that protected us as a child, but now sabotage our life. And so as we go in there and sort through that, we become more self-aware and we become more aware of our own emotions and we become more emotionally intelligent, which allows us to become more conscious, which allows us to really relate better with others. And that's really where the leadership work that I do comes in, because as those leaders become more conscious, they lead more consciously and they create a more safe, supportive, cooperative, collaborative environment, which inevitably ends up increasing productivity and profits. So they don't have to go into that old top-down controlling model any longer. They can go into one that really allows them to integrate and connect with their family more fully, with themselves more fully, with others more fully, enhancing not only their life, but their businesses.
It almost seems like when you talk about work culture, if you're in Japan, for example, they have a work culture. In North America, there's a work culture. In Europe, there's a different work culture. Are there any parts of the business culture that are, yeah, that's the bravado, like the hoorah moment, and it's like, hold on here a second. To get success, it's more than just that. It's one thing to have gumption, but another thing to have, to get there. Is there something about business culture that we are misreading, misunderstanding?
I would say almost, at least 80% of the folks that come to me, they're very smart. They really are. I mean, it's a little overwhelming sometimes. But what I always find is, as we dive down into where they come from and do the more foundational work, is their being smart was a way that they got acceptance and love as a child. A child wants love and acceptance more than anything else, and they'll do whatever they need to get that unconditional love. And so if they get accolades for being smart, then they develop that one. I didn't. I went a different way. But, that intelligence gets them the love and acceptance. It gets them into the right schools. It gets them into the right job. And by the time they're successful and everything's feeling good, everything's going the way they think it should go. But all of a sudden, throughout, a period, they start recognizing that even when they use the same methodologies, same ways of thinking, same ways of being, even when they double down on the effort to instigate it, it's not working any longer. And that's, to them, be honest with you, a very scary time, because all of a sudden everything they've relied on isn't working as fully as it should. To me, it's an exciting time because that means they're ready to evolve. They're ready to access more of who they are. And the truth is that that glass ceiling that they're running into, if we share that, is really just an indicator that they're ready to become more self-aware. They're ready to become more emotionally intelligent, not only with themselves, but with others. And that increases their capacity, their capability of not only taking care of themselves and relating with others, but to run a business more consciously. I've got books on it and I've read many books on it. There's different levels of leadership. And when you look at those, and that's what really got me into working with leaders, is you look at the different levels and they're really just different levels of maturity. They're different levels of self-awareness. They're different levels of consciousness, which means consciousness is just you're more aware of who you are, what you're thinking, what you're emotionally feeling. You're just more aware of how you're not reacting in life, you're responding in life. And so when I realized that the really some of the top folks were really just more conscious people, I just happened to have that ability to take people into those levels of consciousness. So that became my focus. If I'm going to create a more conscious and caring world, then what better way than to help leaders who can really have a huge impact, not only in their organization, but on a societal level, help them become more conscious so that their life becomes one of ease and greater success, but also they're influencing all those folks around them. And some of the people I work with have a couple thousand employees, and boy, when those employees start feeling the you know effects of the CEOs or the founders, shifts, it really creates an amazing transformation throughout the organization, throughout the families of the people in that organization. It's just an incredible transformation throughout.
I've heard the expression iron sharpens iron. And so is this, if once you get into more consciousness around you, awareness of what's happening around you, awareness of you yourself, the task at hand, is it more a matter of being able that if something is not going per plan, that you're more adaptable and adjust, almost going with the flow, like, like a leaf in the wind, right? Once it starts to fall, it follows a pattern, right? And where the wind takes it. Is it somewhat the similar idea, although hopefully a little more structure than the wind blowing the leaf around, that, uh, you know, the bolt didn't go where it's supposed to go. And that's interesting. And do a workaround. Is that being in that kind of that zone where you crossing a path of something, and you have to experience not an adverse outcome, but it's not going as expected. Is that part of the process too?
Think in terms of, you're trusting your mind, you're trusting your ways of being in control of your life, you're trusting all those things, and then they all of a sudden they're not working very well, as we talked about a moment ago. What's really going on is those most of my clients are very logical left brain. They use that left brain logic, that capability is creating an optimum path to get to where you want to get to. But it leaves out the entire right brain's perspective of being more emotionally aware, being more spontaneous, being a much, much bigger picture. And so initially what starts happening is they begin, because as you go into that inner cave and you take care of those challenges that were not resolved when you were young and all the various clutter that we leave in there, as we begin to clean that up, our mind starts getting quieter. And as our mind gets quieter, the integration of the left and right brain begins to develop. And that then the forebrain begins to, in that quiet environment, begins to also blossom, I would say, because so all of a sudden you're starting to get integrated whole brain thinking. You're literally accessing levels of thinking and thought that you just didn't have access to before. Most people, one of the biggest challenges I have is getting people to breathe. I would think that would be something we naturally do, but most people, as soon as they're uncomfortable, emotions come up, or anything that feels threatening to them, they literally stop their breath. They stop breathing. And when I ask them about that, they go, "Well, that allows me to, prepare myself to handle whatever is going on." In other words, they stop breathing and shut down to be in control. Well, of course, my perspective on that is, doesn't that actually put you out of control?
Yeah.
And once they start realizing that, they realize, "Oh, yeah, I don't have access to my higher levels of thinking. I'm not breathing, so I put my body in, signaling fight or flight." So, all of a sudden that motivates them to breathe and open up and begin to access those higher levels of thinking. That inevitably all the things, and I said this earlier, all the things that we did to protect ourselves as a child become the very things that sabotage our life as an adult. So we want to go clean those up, become more self-aware, become more conscious so that we can be a better person and see life from a place of opportunity and ease rather than challenge and, sending off all the challenges and pain that might come. And that allows us to become a more confident, authentic, whole,
Mhm.
capable human being. We heal the gut and open up the heart, which opens up the mind to levels of awareness and thinking that we just didn't even know were available.
Earlier on in as we're describing the overall process, and it almost seems like there are two elements, knowledge and wisdom. And knowledge is one thing, but wisdom is much more than that. Can you walk me around that story?
Well, knowledge is what you know, and you can access that knowing and use it, and that's great. My more advanced, the 2-month program is kind of the foundation, and then I have a 9-month program that really integrates everything that they've been learning, and it's really where everybody talks about the 2 months because it's the most transformative experience of their life. Well, the 9-month is simpler, but it's actually where the greater transformation takes place, because that's when all the rewiring, neurologically rewiring of the brain is solidified and really enhanced to real entirely new levels. And so, I mean, one of my mentors, Joseph Campbell was one of them, but Buckminster Fuller was another. And Bucky, I remember on stage one day, we were about 250 business people in front of us, and he just stopped. I was like 27, he was 87, so I was a little more, socially uncomfortable with just standing on a stage in front of people. And he just was looking up. And it's like, "Well, what are you doing here?" Yeah. But that night, we were sitting in front of the fire having some hot chocolate, and I asked him, big bold move on my part to, "Well, why what was that about?" And he goes, "Oh, I was just accessing information," and he really taught me how to, by quieting my mind, which I was already good at, that I could, rather than just sit in that silence, that I could access information, whether it's a new design or a personal challenge or whatever it is, you can access an entirely different level of thinking from that quiet inward place. I call it big mind, accessing big mind. And for people to run organizations in this ever more complex and tumultuous world that we're in, they can't. In the old days, you go, "Oh, well, let's look back at what we did 5 years ago, or let me get back to you in a couple of weeks or something." I mean, we don't have time for that. We have to be present. We have to be moving forward. We have to be decisive. And that means you really need to be able to access what I'm calling big mind, that place where you're accessing what you're calling wisdom. It's the best of who and what we are, and it comes out without any effort, So I mean, I actually understand now, the research shows that, we have the different frequencies that we are familiar with, the alpha, delta, theta, and whatever the fourth one is. And anyway, usually we're accessing one of those, if we're sleeping or meditating or efforting and trying on something. Well, when you learn to quiet your mind because you've healed all that garbage that was keeping you in a noisy mind. You quiet your mind and you really focus on a specific thing that you're looking for. What they call an alpha bridge is created across all of those different frequencies. So you're really accessing the best of all those frequencies simultaneously. And that's giving you levels of information, wisdom, if you will, that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. So on one level, I can talk about healing the inner child and the hero's journey and all of those things. But on another level, I'm really just talking about restructuring, rewiring neurologically the brain.
For our
Yeah.
audience, for the purposes of our audience, when you say rewiring, if you think of, let's say you come up to your car and you're going to rewire it, that means you're pulling, here's a bundle of cable on a harness. Out it goes, in goes a new harness and maybe another interface somewhere into the space. And I know you're not, it's not an actual physically taking parts of the brain in and out, which sounds really odd. But when you're talking about rewiring, what is, for clarity for the audience, what do you mean by that? And I think I have an understanding of it, but I want to hear your take on it.
Well, the neurology of the brain, which, just as a side note, we also have the same neurology in our gut and in our heart. That's more recent discoveries. But the wiring, the neurology in our brain is literally the wiring in our brain. If we're saying the same thing, doing the same thing, then it's that neurological path is well established. If I'm reacting to something and get angry or frightened or whatever my normal reactions are, that's a well established path. Well, as I start, instead of stopping breathing and not reacting, and I'm breathing and being curious, all of a sudden that path starts going, oh, we're doing it different now. So we start literally going down a new neurological path, or developing a new neurological path. And the old path begins to weaken, and it's like, oh, we're not using that anymore, so we'll use that for something else. And so you literally are the brain is very plastic and very malleable, and it changes all the time. As a child, it's just, the rate of that change is incredible. But even as an adult, I mean, it's definitely a use it or lose it situation. I'm 78 and feeling like I'm as sharp as ever, and other people at my age are not so much.
When you're doing the rewiring, is it usually change meets with resistance? Because people, it's almost like water. It always finds the easiest path. Not and easiest is not necessarily the term I want to use, but this is the path. If I have to change the path, that's going to take more energy. Do you find that your clients then have to kind of focus on it till they get that retrainment happening and re-engage it in a new way? Is there a little more energy they have to do? Is it they have to be mindful that, to breathe, for example? Like, all of a sudden I'm in the middle of a meeting and I'm going, and then, you lock your oxygen supply in your lungs, which is good, but it's only good for so long, and then afterwards, your body's gonna go, "Yeah, you're gonna." Yeah. Is that an energy, thing for them?
For me, we use our old patterns because we're used to them. They seem effortless. But as I introduce people to new patterns of breathing and using their mind and quieting their mind, I mean, a noisy mind is the mind literally uses about 30% of our calories. So if you've got a noisy mind, you literally are going uphill all the time. You're wearing yourself down. You're burning out. All of those, different ways we have of talking about it. And so I think probably a trick that I've learned somewhere along this path is I help people understand how exciting the new opportunities are in front of them and how easy they are to access those opportunities. And so that shift becomes one of, rather than struggle to get rid of an old pattern, it's excitement and establishing the new pattern. And so it's pretty effortless because the old way just doesn't make sense to them anymore. The new way makes all the sense in the world and rewards them time and time again as they continue to journey down that new way.
Ego, how does that provide more resistance? Does that provide easier, or is it just understanding there is an ego and, almost like if you step outside of yourself, "That's my ego. Okay, trim the sails here or tweak it." You can have imposter syndrome, or you could be the other end of the spectrum where, yeah, you're not worried about trying to do something. It just may not have the most ideal outcome. How do you work with ego in that whole scenario?
Ego is what we develop to take care of ourselves on this planet. You
Yeah.
know, living and working in the world, we need an ego to take care of us. And so we have these childhood patterns that we've established that when we've communicated to our ego, this is how, we want you to stop breathing. We want you to protect us. We don't want to have these feelings. We don't feel safe around those people. Whatever those ways of protecting and helping us get through the world that we've recognized work for us as a child, that's what we're using. But the ego is just a part of us that can also change. I mean, my ego's job is to make sure that I'm breathing and being curious. That's its only job, and it does it really well. You know, it's not about defending me or protecting me because it realizes that just puts me out of control. It wants the best for me, so it puts me in control by breathing and being aware and able to access the higher levels of thinking. There's an old Indian story about the king and queen who need to go out and tour their territory in their kingdom, and they put the seamstress who they trust in charge. And of course, the seamstress isn't a leader, and so the only way she can control things is by controlling and shutting things down and making rules and, very fear-based leadership. And, so when they finally do come back, she doesn't even wanna let them in the kingdom because then things will change and things won't be safe, and so that's kind of that seamstress is your ego. It's just not meant to be in control of your life. It's just yes, it's a valuable part of you, but you need to determine what your ego's job is so that it's supportive of your higher vision for who you are and what you're here to do.
If you had advice to somebody out in the audience, what's the one daily practice that can help them stay grounded, dealing with the ego, getting that breathing cycle going? What daily practice would you recommend someone do?
Breathe, literally, yeah.
Oh, I thought it would be telling jokes, man, and just get some good laughs going, and positive jokes. Obviously not derisive, but positive ones.
Why not just sit and for 10 minutes and breathe in and breathe out? And you might say, breathing in, breathing out inwardly as you're breathing. You might breathe in to the count of 4 and breathe out to the count of 10. Hold out to the count of 10, breathe in to the count of 10, hold to the count of 10, breathe out to the count of 10. There's just all sorts of breathing styles that allow we can't quiet the mind. If you tell it to quiet down, it'll just be trying and efforting. So it's kind of a not going to get any results. But if you give the mind something to do, and then it'll thrive. Look at this, watch this, breathe, pay attention to this. What happens then is the mind is quiet enough to allow the development of all of who and what you are. You begin to see your highest aspiration, your compass heading in life. You begin to see opportunity where you only saw challenge and difficulty before. The quieter the mind, the more you are in control of your life. The more in control of your life, the more rewarding, enjoyable, and exciting your life becomes.
From your experience, leaders you've engaged with, what's the one question they never want to ask themselves?
What's the one question nobody asks themselves? Is that what
Or they don't want to ask themselves,
Why am I so afraid?
hence the
Yeah,
name.
I mean, I'm watching, I watch people and they're coming from a contracted, frightened, over controlling place. And I understand why. If all of a sudden I lost my ability to breathe and have higher level thinking, that would be a pretty scary place for me. Really would.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of people are living. They don't need to. It doesn't take much to shift that. But now imagine you're running a corporation or a company and you have all these people with all their challenges and you find yourself just being reactive rather than responsive because you're not in control of yourself even though you're trying to be. That's a scary place.
You find some people that are kind of hesitant when you say philosophical approach, like even excuse me, even when you're talking about the Eastern philosophy, meditation. Well, it doesn't have to be Eastern. You can get that in Europe too, because monks were out there meditating and making wine apparently and other things. But do you find that you get a bit of resistance at the beginning till they understand that listen, if you're breathing, your body's relaxing, and you find that it takes a little bit of a challenge, or is it usually most people accept it and go with it and just didn't realize the door was there to open?
Well, you have to open that cave door and get out all the clutter out of there. It's like a hoarder. They collect all these things, and their house is so filled that they can hardly move from one room to another. But the truth is, those things feel like they protect them. I had a associate who worked with hoarders, and she was telling me how, to get them to throw out anything, a piece of paper or, one of 300 T-shirts or whatever it is they collect, is very, very difficult. A very serious process that the hoarder resists and fights but once they throw out one thing, then you help them process out and let go of another and then another. And then pretty soon, she gets to a point where they're willing to let go. Then she brings in her team, they bring in a dumpster and they start taking everything out. And that's really very similar to what I see the experience here is. Initially, pretty scary, but very quickly it becomes exciting. Becomes exciting because you start seeing what's holding you back, seeing where the real challenges are, they're within you, and that gives you control over them. It's like, "Oh, I can do something about that. I can't do anything with these outer things." And all of a sudden, you start beginning to recognize what your highest intention is, and you know where you want to go in your life. You start recognizing you have access to much more than you ever knew you were aware of or could think about. And so life becomes pretty exciting, and that's what draws them forward into wanting more. The initial 2-month thing is just really the foundation of the structure that we're gonna build to support them throughout their life and supporting others around them.
Ron, if someone's listening to this show, what would be the "Hey, I got to get a hold of Ron" trigger? What would they be seeing in their life? They're sitting on their throne, so to speak, figuratively, and and they're looking around, going, "You know what? Something's off." Obviously, they have to recognize something's off, otherwise they'll carry on and not stop. But what are the flags that they should be looking for?
Your relationship with yourself is mirrored in your relationship with others. So if you're feeling disconnected or if you are disconnected within yourself, you're going to see that mirrored in your relationship with others. You're not going to have, even in your personal relationships with your spouse, with your kids, you're not going to have that relationship that you'd truly like to have. You're leading from a place of more authoritative control rather than cooperation and collaboration. There's all sorts of indicators if somebody's willing to look at it. You're not breathing, and it gets exhausting. You're trying and efforting and pushing and forcing. You're feeling overwhelmed. You're feeling burned out, and other people are being burned out by you. Most so many leaders just lead with their ego. They slosh all of their garbage out onto everybody they work with, and that's exhausting to a lot of people. So you start losing the best people in your organization. So there's lots of indicators throughout your life that you could be doing more. You could be more. And, I mean, why in the world people can't find the courage to fall in love with themselves. Why in the world people can't find the courage to recognize what their highest aspiration in their life is so that their life has meaning and purpose and direction. Why in the world people don't want to continue to evolve and want to get stuck in some limiting comfort zone that literally ends up killing them? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Ron, if someone wants to get a hold of you, say, listen, I need to breathe. I need my ego to park itself a little bit more or reshape itself. How do they get find you?
I would just go to my website. It's ronstotts, STOTTS.com. And, there's material they can download for free that, will help them begin that inner journey. There's certainly lots of information so that they can understand it more fully. And, they can read about the programs and see what's a fit for them. And then when they're ready, they can get on a discovery call with me, and I'll kind of take them into a place where they get to see exactly what they're up against and what they need to do so that they can create the life they're worthy of creating.
Your client base right now, is it just centric to continental US? Is it North America, global?
Well, I have a fellow coming from California today. I have another guy coming from Australia on Monday and Tuesday.
It's a perfect one. It's far reaching. Ron, I want to say thank you so much for being a guest today. This is really awesome. I really appreciate it. I've learned more myself. Ron helps you. And Ron helps you. It's more than just looking successful on the outside. It's about being aligned on the inside. You need to reconnect with that purpose, clarity. And if you're not breathing, of course, then, Ron can help you kind of, figure that process out and get the meditation piece. Because, that's kind of the goal.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.